Good Woche, it is Motzei Shabbos, Saturday night, February 4th, Yud Daled Shvat, 2023, 5783. You're listening to Weather with Enthusiasm. An Arctic air mass of unbelievable cold overspread the East Coast, the Northeast, the New England area earlier today, last night. This is going to be followed by much warmer temperatures as we head into tomorrow and Monday. This air mass broke records all over the place in the New England area. Wind chill dropped to 108 degrees below zero. That's 108 below zero in Mount Washington, New Hampshire. That is the coldest ever reported there. Temperatures across the Northeast reached lows that have not been seen in decades. The National Weather Service office in Boston described the cold as a historic Arctic outbreak for the modern era. And they said this is about as cold as it will ever get. On Friday, the National Weather Service said this is once-in-a-generation event. But here's the thing that's truly unbelievable. This is something that I've never heard of before. First of all, the type of cold that happened in the Northeast, in the New England area, is the type of an annual cold perhaps not annual, but is the type of cold that's reported in the wintertime in the places like North Dakota and Minnesota, places like that. We've seen cold like this earlier this year in places in Minnesota and North Dakota, the very end of December. But this is something that does not normally occur in New England. It is not nearly as cold in New England. The weather extremes are not nearly as cold. Temperatures of 10 degrees below zero was reported in Boston earlier today. That's a record. 8 degrees below zero was reported on Friday in Boston. That's also a record, and that's extremely cold for that city. You know, here in the Midwest, we get temperatures that cold almost annually. The Chicago, Illinois area, on average, sees the coldest temperature of the year near 7 below zero. That's not something that happens in Boston. So this is something very intense for that area. It's really, in some cases, we had temperatures that went into the 30s below zero in places in New York, 30s below zero. That's certainly comparable to stuff that would happen in the Midwest. But here's something that I've never heard of before. Frostquakes were reported, says the Washington Post, in Maine. The temperatures were so extreme in Maine, people were reporting frostquakes. These are earthquake-like tremors which are caused by rapidly plummeting temperatures. It causes the water trapped in cracks in the ground to expand. There were reports of trees exploding. Trees were exploding, which was the result of quickly expanding water stored in sap, reports the Washington Post. Some in the northern New England area were hearing sounds like gunshots throughout the night. In upstate New York, the actual temperature dropped to 38 degrees below zero. There were also winter water spouts reported on Lake Champlain and over the open Atlantic. It kind of looks like a tornado. It resembles a tornado. It's more of a devilish vortex of steam. Frigid air blowing over the comparatively mild waters, which also caused a rare type of fog known as Arctic sea smoke to form. That stuff we've seen here in Chicago on Lake Michigan. This Arctic snap is the result of two low pressure systems which were to the north. There was a low pressure system pushing east through Ontario. And there was an Arctic high pressure over the northern plains. This caused an area of polar air from near the Hudson Bay to move southeast. At the higher altitudes, we have a piece of the polar vortex, which is a pool of frigid air. That one dived from near Hudson Bay, Canada, directly over Maine. Here's something that's also amazing. It's the stratosphere, which is usually about 20,000 feet above the surface, about 4 to 12 miles up, dropped, and actually dropped to less than a mile. The top of Mount Washington was in a completely different atmosphere. It was within the stratosphere, where one would have thought there would have been enormous amounts of ozone if that was the case, but that was not reported. The top of Mount Washington is 6,288 feet. Temperatures are headed into the 40s and 50s over much of the New England area. Actually, Boston, probably low 50s for Sunday and Monday. In some cases, this is a rise of 70 degrees for places in New England within a 24-hour period. You have been listening to the podcast Weather with Enthusiasm. This trailer was updated at the very end of January 2023. We have two things going on. We have evaporative cooling and we also have dynamic cooling, and the two are coming together to produce a major snowstorm in the deep south. The only time you could blame cold air on climate change is when it's a result of the stratosphere warming, which is what causes all the Arctic air to come down south. The way to get a 6-inch snowstorm here in the Midwest and in the Southern Plains has always been you need 3 ingredients. It's hard to believe the numbers that are being forecasted. Several additional feet of snow is expected by Monday morning. Yes! Hey, we have a special guest on our show. What is your name?
Kitabis.
27.1 barometric pressure. Feet of snow are falling in Japan.
Oh my God.
That's a time of celebration. Just Google weather with enthusiasm and they're all going to come up.